That night began like any other evening out with friends, though deep down I carried a heaviness in my heart that I couldn't quite explain. My name is Emily, and I had been married to Mark for nearly 8 years. Our marriage had always looked perfect from the outside: beautiful home, successful careers, a circle of supportive friends, and the type of chemistry people envied. But what no one saw were the small cracks forming beneath the surface, the subtle changes in his tone, the quiet distance when he thought I wasn't watching. I had learned to smile through it, to hold his hand when we entered a room full of people, even when my heart whispered questions I was too afraid to ask. That Saturday night, Mark had insisted we attend a gathering at our close friend Daniel's home. Daniel had been Mark's best friend since college, and I had grown to consider him part of the family. The gathering was supposed to be a simple night party, filled with laughter, music, and the comfort of familiar faces. I dressed in a navy blue evening dress, simple yet elegant, and Mark complimented me as we headed out the door. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the old days when he used to look at me as if I was the only person in the room. That moment quickly faded once we arrived. The house was already alive with music and chatter. Friends we had known for years greeted us warmly, glasses in hand, smiles wide. Daniel's living room glowed with soft golden lights, decorated in a way that made everything feel intimate and alive. I settled into conversation with some of the wives while Mark disappeared into a circle of laughter with his old buddies. It wasn't unusual for him to drift away at social events. He loved being the center of attention, and I had grown used to observing from the sidelines. But that night, there was something in the way he leaned in too closely when speaking to others, something in the secrecy of his glances, that unsettled me. As the night wore on, I noticed Mark constantly checking his phone, his thumbs moving quickly across the screen before he slipped it back into his pocket, as though hiding a secret. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to smile as one of the women beside me told a story about her kids. Still, I couldn't shake the heaviness inside. When I excused myself to the kitchen for some water, I passed by the hallway and caught Mark's voice, low and urgent. He was speaking with Daniel, and their tones were sharp, almost defensive. I froze in place, unable to catch every word, but the fragments that reached me felt like daggers, phrases about keeping it quiet and not letting her know. My chest grew heavy as my mind spun with possibilities. Returning to the living room, I felt like I was walking on glass. The laughter of others sounded distant, muffled under the storm building inside me. When Mark rejoined me moments later, his smile was practiced, almost too perfect. He slid an arm around my waist, and I leaned into it, though every muscle in me resisted. I watched his friends around us, faces I had trusted for years, and suddenly felt like an outsider in my own life. Hours passed, the party deepened, and I excused myself to step outside into the crisp night air. The stars hung above like silent witnesses as I wrapped my arms around myself. Memories of our wedding day, our first apartment, our promises whispered in the dark, flooded my mind. How had we arrived here, at this place where doubt shadowed every word? I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that I was simply tired or reading too much into nothing. But my heart knew better. When I returned inside, I caught another glance exchanged between Mark and one of his friends. It wasn't friendly. It was secretive, guarded, and filled with an understanding I wasn't a part of. That was the moment I decided to confront him, not tomorrow, not later, but tonight, before the silence consumed me. I waited until the music softened and conversations turned quieter. Taking his hand, I led Mark to the side of the room, where the hum of voices couldn't drown us out. My voice trembled as I asked the question I had been swallowing all night. "What are you hiding from me?" The room seemed to shrink around us, the chatter fading into background noise as he looked at me with widened eyes. His silence was louder than any confession, and the way his gaze shifted away told me everything I needed to know. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of everyone. The party continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Friends noticed the tension. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, and I stood there waiting for an answer that never came. Instead, Mark whispered, "Not here, Emily. Please, not now." But my heart had already broken. Trust doesn't vanish in an instant. It erodes, crumbles piece by piece, until one moment, it's simply gone. That night, in the midst of people we called friends, mine shattered. When we finally left the party, the car ride home was quiet except for the sound of my shallow breathing. I stared out the window, watching the blur of city lights, wondering how many of our friends knew the truth, how many had been keeping his secret. Betrayal doesn't just wound, it isolates. By the time we reached home, I knew that my life had changed forever. The days that followed were filled with questions, arguments, and long silences. Mark tried to explain, to soften the truth with excuses, but the damage was done. Trust, once broken, cannot be pieced back together with promises alone. I spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that party in my mind. I realized the betrayal wasn't only about what he had done, but about the fact that he chose to hide it, to let me stand in a room full of people while he carried a secret I wasn't allowed to share. It took months of soul-searching, of therapy, of conversations that left me raw and trembling, before I finally found my strength. I learned that love isn't just about staying, it's about respect, honesty, and trust. And when those are broken, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. I won't pretend it was easy. Saying goodbye to the man I once thought would be my forever felt like tearing away a part of myself. But as I stood by the window one morning, watching the sunlight spill across the floor, I realized I was still standing, still breathing, and still capable of rebuilding my life. That night party had broken me, but it had also freed me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in myself again.